British television didn't really exist before Nigel Kneale. There were programmes, schedules, announcers, studio routines, but not television drama as we now understand it. Not television that assumed it could think in long form, build worlds, sustain ideas, or trouble its audience. Nigel Kneale didn't arrive to change British television, he arrived early enough to create it. And almost immediately, he used it to ask a question that television has never quite learned how to answer. What happens when authority is present, intelligent, well-intentioned, and still wrong? The question runs through everything Kneale wrote. Kneale's importance is often framed in terms of genre, science fiction, horror, fantasy. That framing is convenient, but it misses the point. Genre was simply the space in which he could work. What Kneale was really interested in was behaviour, specifically institutional behaviour, how knowledge is handled, how decisions are delayed, how responsibility disperses itself until no one can quite be blamed, how systems that are designed to manage danger often make it worse by slowing the response to it. From the beginning, Kneale treats authority not as villainous, but as unwieldy. Committees hesitate, experts disagree, procedures slow action. By the time the correct conclusion is reached, the moment for acting on it has already passed. This isn't ignorance, it's structure. That distinction matters because it allows Kneale to write about failure without resorting to caricature. His institutions are not staffed by fools or monsters. They are staffed by competent people doing what their systems require them to do. The damage arises not from bad intentions, but from the way responsibility is organised. This idea that authority can be sincere, rational, and still catastrophically wrong becomes one of the central threads of British television drama. Kneale establishes it before the medium even knows it's capable of carrying that kind of argument. The partnership between Nigel Kneale and Rudolph Cartier is where this new form of television truly begins. Cartier brought cinematic grammar into a medium that had previously been stiff, theatrical, and constrained by the studio. Cameras moved, atmosphere mattered. Space could be suggestive rather than merely functional. Television began to look like something with its own visual language. Kneale matched that technical confidence with intellectual ambition. He wrote as if television could sustain tone, argument, and moral ambiguity across weeks. He wrote as if audiences could remember, connect, and reflect. He assumed continuity of thought. Together, Kneale and Cartier didn't just produce successful programs, they established a working model for what British television drama could be. Everything that followed would operate inside that space, sometimes consciously, but often unconsciously, not copying, refining. Kneale's position as a foundational figure matters because there was so little television drama for him to react against. British television drama did not yet have a settled grammar when Kneale began writing. There was no long tradition of authored serial storytelling, no deep backlog of narrative conventions to inherit or reject. What existed was closer to filmed theatre, cautious in ambition and limited in scope. Kneale wasn't revising an established form, he was inventing one. That helps explain why his concerns became structural so quickly. Without inherited formulas to rely on, Kneale had to decide what television drama was for. He settled on something unusually demanding. Television as a space where ideas could unfold slowly, where authority could be questioned without easy resolution, and where systems could be observed under pressure. This is why his work feels less like genre experimentation and more like case studies. Each program tests how institutions behave when faced with uncertainty, threat, or responsibility, and repeatedly finds them wanting. The Kneale-Cartier collaboration accelerates this process dramatically. Cartier's direction allowed Kneale's ideas to breathe. Camera movement, close-ups, silence, and pacing all became tools for hesitation rather than spectacle. Danger is often suggested before it is shown. Decisions are delayed, not only in dialogue, but in visual rhythm. This matters because it aligns form with content. Authority does not merely fail in Kneale's scripts. It feels slow, procedural, and cumbersome on screen. The viewer experiences delay rather than simply being told about it. The combination, Kneale's writing and Cartier's direction, effectively establishes the baseline language of television drama. Later writers inherit it so completely that its origins become invisible. The Quatermass serials demonstrate this language being formed in real time. What distinguishes them is not their science fiction imagery, but their procedural texture. Meetings interrupt action. Clear warnings stall in committee rooms. Decisions are postponed in the name of caution. Quatermass is often the only character willing to say what must be done, and almost never the person empowered to do it. His frustration is systemic, not personal. He is not battling villains. He is navigating structures designed to distribute responsibility so thinly that decisive action becomes impossible. This pattern becomes one of Kneale's lasting contributions to television storytelling. The idea that danger is often fully understood, yet still allowed to escalate. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Kneale's attention shifts from scientific institutions to cultural ones. The year of the Sex Olympics marks a crucial turning point. Here the problem is no longer hesitation born of caution, but inertia born of comfort. Authority does not stall because it is confused. It stalls because it benefits from delay. The media system Kneale depicts is perfectly aware of its own degradation. Executives articulate the consequences of their actions clearly. What they lack is incentive to intervene. This is Kneale at his most unforgiving. Authority does not simply fail to act, it actively rewards passivity. Delay becomes policy. The Stone Tape revised Kneale's critique of expertise itself. Here, authority is not bureaucratic or commercial, but intellectual. Scientific confidence replaces caution. Competition replaces reflection. The institution encourages speed, innovation, and progress, but has no language for stopping. The haunting functions as consequence rather than mystery. It is not something to be solved so much as something unleashed. This is Kneale showing that even systems built on rational inquiry can become dangerous when responsibility lags behind knowledge. Again, the wrong answer arrives not because people are stupid, but because the system values momentum over restraint. By the road, Kneale has abandoned the idea that intervention is still possible. This is a world where authority remains present, but emptied of force. Systems continue to operate, but no longer serve any protective function. Collapse has already happened. Everyone is simply living inside it. This is important because it shows Kneale's thinking reaching its bleakest conclusion. Delay does not merely cause disaster. Over time, it becomes indistinguishable from normality. Beasts extends this pessimism into encounters with myth. Unlike writers who use folklore as a source of meaning or resistance, Kneale treats it as residue, fragments of older belief systems that no longer function inside modern life. Myth appears, but it does not organize events or restore order. The rational systems Kneale depicts can recognize disturbance, but not integrate it. They lack both the scientific tools and the cultural language to respond effectively. This makes Beasts one of Kneale's most important works for understanding his view of authority. Even when modern systems encounter something genuinely alien, their response is procedural rather than adaptive. Later works, such as The Woman in Black, demonstrate Kneale refining these ideas rather than abandoning them. The horror emerges not from the ghost itself, but from institutional indifference, legal processes, property law, and social convention absorb tragedy without addressing its cause. Authority functions smoothly and disastrously. Moraine and even Kinvig continue this thread in smaller, more oblique ways. Communities and individuals drift through systems that no longer properly recognize them. Authority exists, but connection has eroded. Across registers and genres, Kneale's concern remains constant. Authority does not fail spectacularly. It fails quietly, procedurally, and repeatedly. Kneale's conflict with institutions was not abstract, it was lived. His arguments with the BBC were not simply about money or scheduling. They were about dilution, compromise, and the institutional tendency to soften difficult material in the name of balance or accessibility. Kneale resisted that instinct because it ran directly against what he believed television was capable of doing. Authority, in his work, is not merely slow, it is self-protective. The BBC, like many institutions Kneale scrutinised, valued stability over clarity. Difficult ideas were tolerated only so long as they did not unsettle the system producing them. Kneale's frustration stemmed from recognising that this protective instinct was itself a form of delay, a way of deferring responsibility by smoothing over conflict. His move to ITV did not represent a change of outlook, it represented continuity under different conditions. Commercial television brought its own pressures, its own forms of compromise, and its own versions of institutional inertia. This is why Kneale's late work feels less angry and more resigned. By this stage, he is no longer arguing that authority might be persuaded to act differently. He is demonstrating patterns that repeat regardless of context. Authority hesitates, responsibility disperses, action arrives too late to matter. Across all of Nigel Kneale's television writing, the behaviour is consistent. Warnings circulate, committees deliberate, responsibility disperses. When action finally arrives, it is often correct and irrelevant. This is why Kneale's endings refuse comfort. The immediate danger may be contained, life may continue, but the system remains unchanged and the conditions for repetition are intact. Kneale assumed something about his audience. He assumed they could cope. Discomfort, in his work, is not a failure of communication, it is the point. British television learned, through Kneale, how to live without reassurance. Everything that followed exists in the space Nigel Kneale helped create, not because he predicted the future, but because he understood how authority actually behaves. Thank you very much for listening. I do appreciate that. If you like this video, then I think you may like this one too. But I will be back with another TV show another time.